You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Death Paradox by Jeffrey EBRIGHT, performed by Otis Jiry. Old Joe sat back in his battered lawn chair and watched the driveway lay flat. Jackson Blackfeather had decided air conditioning was much better than free beer, so Joe enjoyed the lazy summer day without his Native American friend. "Excuse me." A shadow crossed Joe. "You're blocking my sun, mister. I get grumpy when I get tan lines." "Are you Joe?" The masculine voice asked calmly. Joe slid his New Orleans Saints cap up and met the man's somber gaze. "Some call me that. Why?" "Are you Joe?" he repeated without emotion. Joe sized up the man before him. He was decked out in a double-knit, two-piece brown plaid leisure suit and scuffed brown hush-puppy loafers. He was in his late 40s, peppered hair and smoker's wrinkles. His eyes held more than his silly image represented. "Yep, I'm Joe." "Good." A thin, humorless smile broke across his face. The man looked down the driveway. No one. He looked into the garage. No one there either. He reached into his pocket and removed a gun, to which he slowly screwed a metal tube on the end of the barrel. The silencer effortlessly clicked into place. "What are you doing, mister?" Joe pulled out a Marlboro and a light, took a deep draw. "I'm getting ready to kill a demon." "Demon?" Joe choked on the smoke. "Me? Now that may be the funniest thing I've heard in a long time." He chuckled low and thick. The man lowered the gun to Joe's head. "When you get to hell, tell them Elvis Hightower sent you." He pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing happened. He cocked the hammer again. Click. He pulled the trigger again. Click. A look of frustration broke across his face. Click, click, click. "What the?" the man growled. "Y'all finished?" The man put up a finger as a "wait a minute" sign. He popped the clip and examined the gun. He ejected the shell from the chamber and stared at the bullet. The back of the bullet was indented with hammer marks. All the while, old Joe continued to smoke his cigarette. "I don't get it." He stared at the bullet. "Sometimes things don't work out like we want 'em," offered Joe. "Are you still open?" called a male voice from the edge of the drive. "Yep." Joe waved him up. "We done here, Elvis?" "This isn't finished by a long shot." He tucked the gun back into his jacket and stomped down the drive. Elvis Hightower cursed and fumed at himself as he made a fast retreat to his car. He briefly stared at the clean-looking young man walking up the drive and hastily made his getaway. "Man, did that guy look pissed to wood," said a 20-something man in a Jack Daniels t-shirt. "I ain't buying what he's selling." Joe shrugged from his battered lawn chair. "Can't win 'em all." "I can see with these pythons." The man gestured to his scrawny biceps, chuckled, then brushed back his mullet as he set about the sale with curiosity. In a matter of moments, the garage sale sprang to life with wandering shoppers. Although there was no real thought as to why they stopped, they milled from table to table as if something lie in wait for their pocket change. The clean-cut young man was minding his own business, absently combing through the 25-cent table, when he felt a hand lightly touching his arm. "Say, aren't you that boy?" The elderly lady, decked in a worn housecoat, looked brightly at him through her paunchy face. "Eunice, come here for a minute." As if cloned in a different housecoat, Eunice joined her friend. "What is it now, Gertie?" Isn't this the boy from the news? You know, the one that saved Charlotte's kid from that terrible car wreck last night." Eunice gave the young man a long, hard look. Then her eyes grew wide. "I do believe it is. Oh, what was his name? Rob?" "No, that ain't it." Gertie shook her head. "Bob? Or is it Tom? Or Mike?" "No, that ain't it either." Gertie continued to shake her head. "How about Rob?" chimed Eunice. "You already said that, and it still ain't it, Eunice." "How about Greg?" the young man offered. "No, that ain't it." Gertie grimaced. "I have to agree with Gertie, young man. I'm almost sure it's Greg, ladies. Greg Parsons." He held out a hand and shook with both ladies. "You probably know my dad, Roger. He's a city councilman. I work with the volunteer fire department as an EMT. Did you know the boy we pulled out of that car last night on Bellbrook Road? I heard he was still in critical condition." Both ladies shook their heads vigorously, but Eunice spoke first. "That boy's in a world of hurt, and without your blessed intervention, Charlotte Kessler would have been planning a funeral for her little Robbie." "That's right, Eunice." Gertie reached up a wrinkled, flabby hand to Greg's face and tweaked his cheek. "You just keep up the good work, sonny." And with that, the two house-coated ladies loaned their attention to another table of savings and waddled away in mundane conversation. "Saving lives, that's a noble profession," a withered voice added. Greg turned to meet the 70-ish gaze of his old family physician, Dr. Talbot. His smile was generous as he leaned against the old crooked cane made of hickory. "Yes, sir, it is." Greg smiled back and shook his hand. "Looks like the hip replacement surgery isn't keeping you homebound." "Gregory, I'm too old to quiver under the bed covers and wait for the reaper. I figure my advanced age will make me easy prey when that time comes." Both chuckled, and Dr. Talbot turned to Joe. "How much are the books in the garage?" "Paperbacks are a quarter, hardbacks 50 cents mostly." Joe stood to meet the doctor's inquiry. "Some are $1. Depends on your choice." "Thank you." Dr. Talbot smiled and hobbled back into the garage. "Take care, Doc," Greg called out after him. "You looking for anything in particular?" Joe addressed the young EMT. "Well, now that you mention it," Greg stopped scratching the back of his head and thought. "We have this party at the firehouse every year. No, not a big deal. Just one of those things where you can unwind. But we all have to dress in costume. I was looking for some inspiration for a costume. That's why I stopped here." "Well," old Joe crushed out his cigarette, "that's what my garage sale's for." Greg had a slight twinkle in his eyes. He said, "I think the doc has given me a great idea for my costume." "Then take a look around." Joe swept his hand across the breadth of his bargain domain. "I'm sure something will take your fancy." Minutes later, Greg brought his acquisition up to Joe. "The tag says $25, but would you say to 20? Joe looked up at the young man and viewed the object of his haggling. The EMT was holding a grain sickle that stood about 6 feet and had a 2.5-foot-long wicked-sharp blade crowing the staff. Halfway down the shaft jutted a knurled handle. The dark wood seemed ageless and unbound by its obvious antiquity. "I'd say, what would a city boy need with a sickle?" piped Joe. "Well," Greg widened his smile again, "this is the perfect accessory for a Grim Reaper costume, don't you think?" "Oh," Joe shook his head. "Irony, I get it. So how does $20 sound?" Greg asked again. "Sounds like a deal I can live with if you can." After money changed hands, Greg Parsons carefully placed the sickle over his shoulder and walked to his car. He spent several reflective moments on how he was going to load the 6-foot sickle with a big blade into his Chevy Corsica without carving up the upholstery. Remembering the moving blanket tucked in his truck, Greg deftly wrapped the padded blanket around the sharp metal edge and placed it in the back seat. He rolled down the back passenger side window to allow the butt end of the staff to loll lazily outside the car like a dog trying to catch a moving breeze. Before he was halfway home, Greg's mind began to wander as he made his way through tree-lined suburban streets. He started thinking about the twisted hunk of metal that once was Robbie Kessler's car. On that deserted stretch of road, the overturned car lay with its left quarter panel loosely waving in the wind like a drowning swimmer's flailing arm. The yellow Z28 looked like a partially peeled banana, and Greg's heart sank as he thought no one could survive a brutal wreck like this one. A pervasive smell of gas and smoldering stench of tire rubber met Greg as he bent down to look into the crushed passenger compartment. To his surprise, the bloody face of Robbie Kessler locked eyes with him as the injured driver dangled upside down in his seatbelt. "Please, help me," he wheezed, spitting tooth fragments as he begged. "Don't worry, I won't let you die tonight, I promise." Greg huffed as he pulled at the car door. No luck. The door was jammed tight and the window opening had been severely compacted and was too small to pull the driver through. Greg's mind filled with adrenaline and panic, trying to figure his next move. The heat of the engine and the spilled gas weighed heavily upon him. Only minutes remained before the car's gas tank ignited and turned Robbie Kessler into a pig on a spit. Greg looked about the wreckage for a pry bar or other means of extraction. It was then Greg thought he had noticed a figure in black looming in the tree line on the side of the road. Greg suddenly snapped back into reality and slammed on his brakes. He watched in abject horror as the man in the crosswalk tumbled over the Corsica's passenger side hood and flopped onto the grass. Greg quickly shoved the gear shift into park and bolted from his car. The man lying on the ground was in his late 50s, early 60s, and looked as fragile as paper. His smallish eyes rolled back into the sallow face, and his thin-lipped mouth absently tried pronouncing silent words. "Sir, sir!" Greg elicited a reaction from the older man. "Can you hear me, sir?" Greg looked around for help, but there were no cars or pedestrians in sight. However, he did notice he was less than a block away from his house. "That hurt." The old man sat up with some difficulty. Greg waved at the old man. "Please, sir, don't move. You could be seriously injured." "Oh, I do not feel seriously injured." The old man surveyed his clothing. "Please, sir, you may be in shock." "Oh, I am shocked. I just got hit by a car. It was my first time." He managed to smile. "We need to get you to a hospital," pleaded Greg. "No," he responded and tried to get it to his feet. "I do not believe in hospitals." Greg assisted him to his feet. "Then let me take you to my house. It's just down the street. I'm an EMT and I have a kid at my house. At least let me check you out, okay?" "Well, if it'll make you feel better." The old man hobbled to Greg's car. Greg helped the man into the car and quickly jumped into the driver's seat. He fired up the Corsica and raced to the house. "What is that thing in the back seat?" asked the old man. "Oh, it's my Grim Reaper sickle," Greg said absently. Are you practicing by hitting people with cars before you're allowed to move up to sharp objects?" "No, it's just that... never mind." Greg responded, flustered as he pulled into his drive. "Sit tight. I have to open up the house and turn off the alarm. Then I'll help you inside." "Take your time." The old man waved him off. By the time Greg had shunted the security system and made his way back to the car, the old man had ingeniously removed the sickle and was using it to lean on. Tightly gripping the perpendicular handle, the old man was slowly making his way to the front door. Greg said nothing, electing to help the man into his house by providing additional support. Greg sat the old man down on his couch next to the medical kit he had removed while opening the house. He expertly began unwinding the blood pressure cuff from a kit. "I could use a glass of water if you do not mind." said the old man. In just a minute. Greg prepped the cuff. I could really use one now, he asserted. Okay. Greg got up and almost tripped over the prone sickle. He propped up the old-fashioned farmer's implement on a love seat and headed to the kitchen. Once back with the water, he discovered the old man rummaging through his med kit. Get out of there, Greg grumbled. Sorry, I was curious. The man smiled and took the offered glass of water. Gone was the look of hit-and-run discomfort. I really should check you out. In a moment. I should like to catch my breath. He savored a slow drink, then set the glass on the coffee table. Please have a seat. Greg dropped into his armchair, which sat across from the couch, and anxiously peered at the old man for signs of latent trauma. We should really get you checked out. In time, he smiled. You said you're an EMT? Yeah, I got my certification 2 months ago. The old man took another drink. Have you always wanted to be an emergency medical technician? I wanted to be a fireman or a doctor. An EMT is like the best of both worlds, Greg shrugged. I always thought saving lives was the coolest profession anyone could have. Why? Well, when I was a little kid, I almost died. Greg paused for a moment, as if reliving the experience. Water can be a deadly playground for an 8-year-old boy. The old man finished his water. Yes, The fine hairs on the back of his neck stood to attention, and Greg's mouth felt barren. I never said anything about water. 20 years ago, you fell into Lake Cumberland and drowned. You were pulled from the water 9 hours later and spent 4 days in a coma before you woke up, the old man said matter-of-factly. How did you know? Greg stammered. Would you like to know a secret about that day, Greg? Greg's eyes widened. I never told you my name. That day at Lake Cumberland was your last day alive. You died. What the hell? Greg felt a queasy churning in his stomach. It was the natural order of things, Greg. You were supposed to have ceased life on this material plane 20 years ago. Due to a technical difficulty, you've remained here in the world of the living. What kind of technical difficulty? The old man grimaced. It was a clerical error. Your demise was overlooked. No one was assigned to collect your soul and convey it to the next existence. So I'm just some kind of zombie? Spat Greg. The old man laced his fingers and thought for a moment. You are not undead, and you are not living. The best way I can describe it is that you are non-dead. Non-dead? What does that mean? You are not technically reanimated to the world of the living, and therefore you're not undead. However, all rights to the living world were to be forfeited upon the matter of your death. Unfortunately, you continue to exist on this plane. That makes you non-dead. Greg put his head in his hands. I don't understand. Maybe it'll help if I explain my role. I'm part of the celestial body that helps souls pass from existence to existence. Myths call us soul collectors or reapers, like the Grim Reaper. Greg cut in. Actually, it's not a grim profession. It's a highly prized possession in the celestial body. Assisting souls to the next level of enlightenment is a very rewarding task. So you've come to kill me, huh? I cannot kill what is already deceased, Greg, the old man sighed. When no one came to collect you 20 years ago, your soul hung around your corporal form. Without any direction or intervention from a soul collector, your soul decided to re-enter your waiting body. The technical difficulty essentially granted you a 20-year grace period. It probably would have been longer if it had not been for your recent heroics. Huh? He stared blankly at the old man. Robert Kessler was supposed to be collected last night. So? So you interfered with the natural order of this plane. Robert Kessler should have died, but you saved him and he survived. I don't get it. Let's just say you are a random variable in the equation. You died 20 years ago. However, the clerical celestial snafu not only made you non-dead, but give you the ability to change the outcome of the living. Greg stared at the wall, almost speaking to himself. I never thought I could save him. He was pinned and the car went up like a bonfire. The heat was incredible. I grabbed the car door and ripped it off the hinges. I pulled him free just as the whole car went up. I saved his life. Yes, you did. When one walks between the living and the dead, the impossible becomes possible. The laws of physics do not apply to the non-dead. It's a hard lesson we learned from Solomon and Pliny. But I saved his life. Yes, and in doing so, you alerted us to the clerical error made 2 decades prior. You mean I'm immortal? You were until you flew onto our radar. I would dare say you could have gone on a very long time, but you interfered in the course of natural human progression. Now you must shuffle off this mortal coil and proceed directly to your next existence. But I'm not... Greg felt a small, sharp pain piercing his right temple. His body immediately slumped into his armchair. The old man stood and walked over to where the sickle lay. As he came upon the lifeless body of Greg Parsons, he paused for brief reflection. The old man brought the sickle up, and his visage changed. The features on his face melted away to become skin shaped of moonstone, which housed soft blue eyes on a featureless face. His clothes shimmered into a long, white, flowing robe, and his hands arched into long, lithe fingers. The downward stroke of the sickle sank into Greg's chest, but did not pierce the flesh. Instead, the blade cut a long, glowing red line down the length of his torso, as if drawn with fluorescent paint. Immediately, an ashen, opaque hand burst from the glowing red seam. The former old man grasped the hand and pulled. Like a dinosaur freeing itself from the deadly prehistoric tar pits, Greg burst from the cavity and stared in astonishment. "You killed me!" he screamed. "I cannot kill what is already deceased, Greg." The former old man sighed, his voice disembodied and slightly melodic. "How did you do it?" "Brain aneurysm. Simple, quick, and very little pain." Greg looked at his new form. He likened it to Dr. Strange's astral form in the old comic books he had read in his childhood. He also noticed the lack of fear previously dominating his heart. "So what do we do now?" Greg inserted. "Now that we have fixed the glitch, we rectify the problem the glitch you unknowingly created." "Robbie Kessler." Greg sighed. "Yes, but do not feel bad. He would have lived his life as a quadriplegic with 60% brain damage. Do we stop there before I go on to whatever I'm going to go on to?" The former old man cocked his smooth head. "I do not see why we cannot pick up Robert along the way." "Well, he is my responsibility." Greg held out his hand, and the soul collector passed him the sickle. "By the way, what's up with the angelic look? I thought Reapers dressed in black and were all bones." "Goth is passé in every realm but the material." The shimmering soul collector shrugged. "We blame it on Robert Smith." Greg groaned. "I see a poor sense of humor is not a bad thing for a Reaper. Must not need a lot to qualify for the job." "Well, people are dying to apply." The entity began to fade. "Oh, that's worse than the cure joke." Greg faded with him. "Seriously, this line of work has killer benefits." "Stop it," Greg managed to say before they vanished. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to this story in its entirety. If you enjoy what you hear and what I do and would like to support me and my efforts, visit my Patreon page at patreon.com/Otis Jiry. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button and subscribe today, and share this video with everyone on your social media. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Again, thank you for listening and have a great day. God bless you.